Hi, this is Carla Flores. Welcome to my service learning presentation about my interview with Dr. Fred Kitchens, who can see pictured here, and his Computer Information Systems capstone course, which is actually a double course, that is service learning. Fred Kitchens has a PhD and is an associate professor of Information Systems and Operations at Ball State. He earned his PhD in Management Information Systems at the University of Mississippi, his MBA and his bachelor's at Georgia Southern University. My interview summary talks about how Kitchens provided details in his service learning project and how it has evolved over time. Specifically, he answered questions about his background, the evolution of the capstone class as a whole, which I will explain, the detail about the service learning project and how it developed in the class, formal goals and assessments he's used for that class, and his assumptions about the course and its signature project. So as a background, Fred entered the insurance industry after high school, completely different direction, but quickly became disillusioned by looking at a bunch of insurance policies and just couldn't see himself doing that for the rest of his life. During that time, he was by then getting his MBA, and a transformative event happened when he was asked to teach some classes kind of on an emergency basis. An instructor had left abruptly. After the first couple of classes, he said he found his calling in teaching, and his next task was to figure out how he could do that for a career. I chose Fred as an interview subject because he's a colleague of mine. I knew of his service learning capstone project and really thought this was a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about it. We met over Zoom and talked for over 2 hours. So a little bit about the project. This is kind of unusual. I don't know that any other course or capstone course in certainly the College of Business at Ball State is a 2-course component or a 2-course kind of partnership. The course spans an academic year. They take the first course in the fall, second course in the spring. Groups of students work as a cohort, so the same students continue from one semester to the next. They work with a customer. The customer has been chosen because they have a business problem that they can have the students work on. So the customers explain the problem. The groups research the business problem and possible solutions. The ultimate deliverable is a presentation to the customer. Obviously, this is the second semester, with a proposed solution. The customer has a role in how well they do in their final project by deciding if the solution would solve their business problem or not. However, there is a recovery time period built in. If the customer does not feel that the student's project solved the problem, the students have a chance to regroup and make modifications to satisfy the customer. So, some special features of this capstone, according to Kitchens, and the way that the course developed over time. He mentioned that he's taught this class for 20 years. So as he has gone on, he's tried new things, and everything that has worked, he has kept. One of the first things he did was requiring students to complete personality profiles, such as DISC, which is an old and well-known personality profile. You can look it up, actually. He has more recently added Clifton Strengths. So he has speakers that facilitate the testing and the results and help the students understand themselves a little bit better and help they understand each other. So those profiles help with the team formation and also the functioning of the team. So an interesting thing that Fred does is that he starts by hiring project managers. So interested students are asked to submit resumes and personality profile results, so the DISC and the Clifton Strengths, and then Fred actually chooses the managers to head up the teams. So then the managers or the project managers get together and pick their teams. So they negotiate, they have their short list, and they kind of negotiate. It reminded me of how Little League coaches get together and try to pick their teams. He does provide them quite a bit of guidance. So obviously this is a computer information systems major, so there's a lot of computer systems, but there's also a lot of what we would call in HR soft skills. So working with the customers, learning how to present, learning how to communicate effectively, and all of those things. So Fred makes a very intentional point of working with those students to provide that kind of skill development for the students. Some of Fred's lessons learned, I thought this was fascinating. I've read a bit of research about team development, but he has found over the years that group size is a determining factor of social loafing and or free riders. So social loafing is when a group member puts in less effort than the rest of the group. A free rider is somebody who does almost nothing, but still gets credit for the group project. So Fred found that teams of 5 may or may not have a social loafer or free rider. However, teams of 6 always have them, and there are always 2. So I thought that was fascinating. He found early on that volunteer project managers or team leaders had unreliable performance. So early in his days of teaching, he would say, who is interested in being a project manager? Show of hands. And he would just sort of pick the people that volunteered. So he found that they didn't always perform well, even though they were anxious for the responsibility, the recognition, whatever. They weren't always a good match for that leadership position. So he now requires that they submit resumes, the personality tests, and has over time seen a very consistent improvement in the process of how well they can lead their teams. Another issue, anytime you have groups, there are problems with groups, and Fred's classes are no exception. So one of the often discussed options is whether you allow a group to fire a team member. And over time, Fred has decided that it really is not desirable to let them fire a team member, partly because this is a 2-semester commitment. What do you do with a lone student after they've been kicked out of a group? So it's just very difficult to manage. Secondly, if you fast forward to the work setting, you're not going to be able to fire a team member because you're not their boss. So firing a team member is not really an option in the working world, and he decided it should not be an option in his teams either. So instead, he counsels the project manager about how to manage problems with the team members. Fred's assumptions were also really interesting. First, he said he started out believing that every student could succeed with the project, but he found that not all students are sort of wired for problem solving. He also assumed every team could at least reach the norming stage, but over time he has found that they indeed can't. That's not a guarantee. They can't always reach that stage. He assumed that if he gave verbal instructions to students, for example, here's how you contact the customer, here's how you follow up, and so forth, they would forget them. He was correct. They did. So instead, he had to construct exercises where he kind of threw some challenges at them, and then they got to work through them. And that way they remembered. He has assumed that his class can always be improved on and has found that it can. But one of the most unusual answers to the question was he said he had often wondered about how he could measure his own success and growth. He thought about a few options. He rejected simply the number of years he's been teaching because, as we all know, the number of years you've done something doesn't necessarily have anything to do with how successfully you're doing it or whether you've grown. And he settled on how many lines on a student's resume can he say that his classes and experiences gave a student enough information, experience that they could add a line to their resume. And how many lines could be added because of his projects and activities? That is what he chose as his measure of success. I thought that was perfect because it's student-focused and very appropriate. Lessons learned for me as I was listening to this. He talked about getting alumni feedback, and he explained that the student alumni have not just experienced this year-long project, but they've also been out in the world of work and found how incredibly valuable it is to their performance on the job. Whereas students that are in class right now may not have that complete view of the future impact. So he tends to listen to alumni slightly more than current students when he's asking for feedback. I liked that he selects the project managers as a start of team formation and then has the project managers in turn select their teams. I may have to try that on one of my classes because I think that's an intriguing option. I've not done that before. I like that he doesn't require his students to actually implement the project. So that seems like a very realistic choice. The recommendations to the clients are actually what count as the final project, rather than their technical implementation of it. I want to thank you for listening to my presentation, and here are the references I've used for this project.